the program director. And my friend Nuria here with me today is the program coordinator. And we are very excited to have you here with us today. Before we start, I'd like to inform you that this lecture will be recorded on video and broadcasted on our Facebook page. Please remember to keep your microphones switched off during the lectures. And if you have any questions, please write them in the chat box and we will address them after each lecture. Due to time constraints, and we will begin our session on time with introducing the speakers for today that are here to welcome you. We will start with Ambassador Daniel Zunschein, Director Overseas Programs at Mashav. Please, Ambassador, the floor is all yours.
Thank you, Rana, and I'm glad to be here. On behalf of the Mashav headquarters, I'd like to welcome you all. Actually, the head of Mashav is Einat. She's an ambassador, but she's not in Israel at the moment, so it would be more suitable that she will talk to you as the head of Mashav and as a woman, but a leader in Mashav. But since she's away, so I have the honor. You know, we are in a very good time to speak about promoting women in leadership, women's leadership in public life, because last night 9 new ministers were sworn as a part of the Israeli government, new government. Not half, not a majority, but still a step in the right direction. And I hope that soon this issue will not be an issue, because it will be natural, it will be a part of life, and women will not have to be promoted in order to be leaders in public life, which in many cases they are already, at least in my private life. And I wish all of you, all the participants, a very good, fruitful, and a rich discussion. And I hope that we'll keep in touch, and we'll see your leadership in public life and in Mashav life and in any corridors of life. So on behalf of the headquarters of Mashav, good luck to you in any way.
All right. Thank you so much, Ambassador, for your words and for being here with us today. Thank you. Now to our next speaker, MCTC Director, Ms. Chava Kari. Chava, the virtual floor is all yours.
Thank you very much. Thank you, Ambassador, for opening today's session. We appreciate it very much. Thank you, Rana, and thank you, Nuria, for putting together this important program. Our center is in beautiful Haifa, as you see from Rana and Nuria's backgrounds. And we were established in 1961. After 60 years, we have trained hundreds of thousands of professional women and men working in 5 languages from 147 countries all over the world. We are one of the Mashav training centers that belongs to the Ministry of Foreign Affairs. We are continuing Golda Meir's vision. Golda Meir is sitting in back of me, and of gender equality through social justice and human rights for all. And now I have the great honor of introducing our first speaker, a great friend of our center, who will be giving the keynote speech from the global perspective on promoting women's leadership in public life. Our first speaker coming to us is the UNDP resident representative, Ms. Christine Musisi. Ms. Musisi brings 23 years of leadership and experience from the development arena and has served as for the United Nations in different capacities and in various countries at national and global levels. Before coming to UNDP as resident representative in Tanzania, Ms. Musisi worked for UN Habitat as Director of External Relations Division. From 2012 to 2016, Ms. Musisi served as UN Women's Representative for Kenya, prior in Eastern and Southern Africa, Regional Director and Representative to Kenya. Prior to that, she has held many senior positions Deputy Director, Country Director for UNDP in Ethiopia, Deputy Head of Policy and Technical Cluster, Policy Advisor at UNDP Regional Center for Eastern and Southern Africa. Just to name a few, I have a long list here, and so I will time consuming, so I will name a few: policy and technical advisor for UN in Africa, Eastern Europe, Central Africa, etc., etc., etc. Christine, as I said, is a great friend of our center, and we've worked together with her for many years, and we enjoy every time. Christine Musisi has led innovative initiatives in local economic development, democratic governance, poverty reduction, social mobilization, civil society empowerment, gender and development, business and private sector engagement, and development financing. Thank you, Christine. It's amazing that you're with us today, and we're so happy to have you, and we hope to see you soon in Israel as well. So please, the floor is yours, Christine.
Thank you so much, Hava. It's a real pleasure for me to participate in this online course as a keynote speaker on the global overview of women in public life. It's a real honor to meet Ambassador Danny Zonshine, representing Mashav, and my friends at MCTC, Ms. Hava Kari, the director, and her team, and the esteemed participants of this course who are all leaders in politics, international institutions, government, academia, and civil society. I am actually one of the beneficiaries of the MCTC training and advisory services, so you know, it's really a pleasure to be part of this process as well. Now, while women's leadership in public life cuts across political and governmental leadership, my talk will have more focus on political leadership, and I hope that's okay, with which I have been able to support and facilitate, not as a politician, but as an international civil servant in the United Nations. In my presentation, we will touch on the following. One, where we are globally on women's representation in public life, the case for women's equal participation, the most critical barriers to women's participation and representation in public life, and a key question, which is for all of us: what can we do about these barriers, and what can we do to promote women's equal participation? So where are we globally? Many states or countries have actually ratified international conventions and protocols on gender equality and women's participation. The current levels of women's representation in government and political office can therefore be considered, because they are low levels of representation. They are way below what we expect. So we can consider them to be a violation of women's fundamental democratic rights. We see that women serve as heads of state and government in only 22 countries out of 193 member countries of the United Nations. This represents only 11% or 11.4% if you want to be precise. It is estimated that it will take another 130 years to reach gender equality in the highest positions if we continue in our work as we are at the moment. Something has to change. I am pleased to note that Tanzania, actually, since March 2021, has its first female president, Her Excellency Ms. Samia Suluhu Hassan, who is also the first female president in Eastern Africa. We have also seen a historical movement in the US, having the very first female vice president, Kamala Harris. There are several others, but I just thought I would mention those two. And then moving to government ministers, you know, only 21% of government ministers are women globally. with only 14 countries out of the 193 UN member states having achieved 50% or more women in cabinets. Over 25% of all national parliamentarians are women, up from 11% in 1995, with only 33% in local councils or local government. I must say that Rwanda, currently a small nation in Eastern Africa, currently has the highest rate of female parliament members with 61%, followed by Cuba and Bolivia with 53%, and the United Arab Emirates with 50%. I want to also mention a couple of powerful international organizations. The European Commission, led by Madame Ursula, Her Excellency Ursula von der Leyen, and the World Trade Organization, led by Dr. Ngozi Okonjo-Iweala. I'm mentioning these two international organizations because they influence and help determine global policies, which in turn influence national policies. So why should we, I will go to my second question or second issue for this paper. Why should we promote women's equal participation in decision making? Why should we try to ensure equality? First, it is a human right for every global citizen to influence decisions that affect their lives. It is a right for women, according to global conventions such as CEDAW, for women to participate in public life, be it at the community or state level. Second, women's participation in decision-making is good for all of us. We see that true political participation or true political leadership is demonstrated by women because they are the best in establishing common ground. Women's leadership has been found to work across political party lines to pass legislation that promotes the public good for all. It has been found that when women make up a critical mass of legislatures at around 23 to 30%, they are more likely to challenge established discriminatory norms and policies. Quoting from the Council for Foreign Relations, in Northern Ireland, Catholic and Protestant women's groups joined forces, which was a real game changer, to establish a powerful political party that made progress across religious divides during the Northern Ireland peace efforts in the late 1990s.
Sorry, Barney, the earpiece.
In South Sudan, in 2013 to, sorry, I had to mute that colleague. In South Sudan in 2013 to 2015, women leaders across party lines produced their position paper for building a peaceful nation, which formed a large part of the peace agreement between the two warring factions. This process facilitated women's influence to ensure political stability of the country. Because I recall that when the two factions, the two opposing parties were trying to negotiate who takes what in that process, women were more concerned about building peace, sustainable peace in the nation. And their strong voice really helped to change the whole direction of slicing the cake, from slicing the cake to actually building sustainable peace. The other reason is that parliaments with a higher share of women lawmakers are more likely to pass and implement legislation that advances gender equality and specifically addresses issues of domestic violence, rape, sexual harassment, increased investment in health, education, water, and sanitation. Among the OECD high-income countries, the growth in the number of female legislators led to an increase in educational expenditures, while we see that in India, women-led village councils were more likely to support investments in drinking water. I want to give an example of Rwanda, being from this region of Eastern Africa. Statistics have recorded structural transformation in several ways. One, because of the high level of women's representation, women are the majority in parliament, and also quite a number in the cabinet. We have seen a decline in the percentage of women in extreme poverty from 40% to 16%. We have seen an increase in the percentage of women's possession of land by 26%. And we have seen them addressing through legal instruments the gender pay gap and making Rwanda rank the 9th globally in the list of countries with the smallest gender pay gap. So it really pays to put women in leadership. I would also like to note that countries led by women are seen to have had greater success in addressing the COVID-19 pandemic and have reported fewer cases and deaths. I hope you agree with me on this. And this is actually mainly attributed to the higher rates of universal healthcare coverage and investment in healthcare systems, which made them better prepared for the pandemic. This is like Germany and New Zealand, for example. The other reason that we should really invest in women's leadership, public leadership, is that seeing is believing. When women see other women succeeding in public life, it inspires them to participate also. So it's a great reason, I think it's a good enough reason that we put our efforts in promoting women's leadership. But of course, there are so many barriers to women's success and even access into this sphere of work. First, it is, as usual, the gender stereotypes and traditional norms. We've always talked about the famous triple role of women, which represents their role in production, their role in reproduction, and community roles. We find that even in socioeconomically advanced countries and systems, women are forced to make a choice between family and public office. This is grounded in cultural norms that are still discriminatory and therefore influence the level and effectiveness of support systems for women in public office, be they support systems at family level or peer support networks or institutional levels. We are operating, ladies and gentlemen, in a leadership system that is developed by men and for men. My apologies, Ambassador Danny, if I'm saying this so openly. But this male-dominated model of politics tends to undermine the value of women's contributions and their participation beyond being vocal in campaigns. When somebody needs voices in the campaign, yes, women come, we all rally around our people, but then when it comes to decision-making structures in political parties, women are usually absent. We also sometimes come across the reference to politics as a dirty game, in which many women find undesirable to participate. So, they find many significant obstacles which men usually do not have. Women also have much more restricted access to financial resources. Campaigns are very expensive, and so are the registration fees, especially for higher political office, which many women cannot afford. One area that I would like to touch on is that of women's security. It's noted that as the number of women seeking political leadership increases, there is sometimes a backlash with hostility and violence against them. And some of this hostility, we see it even in the media, let alone among families or various networks. I have looked at some data from ACLED. It is the Armed Conflict Location and Event Data Project, which notes that Non-sexual attacks, such as attempted assassinations of female politicians or repression by state forces, account for 47% of violence targeting women, while sexual violence accounts for 34%. Non-sexual attacks are the predominant way in which women are targeted in the Middle East, while sexual violence is the leading type of violence targeting women in Africa and accounting for 42% of all violence targeting women on the continent. There's also mob violence, which is more prevalent in South Asia. The last but not least barrier is women's own confidence. We have so many self-limiting perceptions. We have so many, because I mean, even I had so many limiting self-perceptions of myself, and I would encourage you to look at Kate Coleman's book on the 7 deadly sins of women in leadership. I found that book very enlightening about my own barriers to leadership. So with all of this information, what can we do? First, I think we need the right legal and policy frameworks, and I'm sure that our speaker, Dr. Francis Rader, or Professor Francis Rader, will speak to that a little bit more. But we need to ensure national ratification of all relevant international conventions and instruments. We also need to build the capacity of governments, political institutions, and communities to implement them. These include the Universal Declaration of Human Rights, the Convention on the Political Rights of Women, 1952, and we really want to thank our mothers and sisters of those days that made this happen, CEDAW, and of course, our Sustainable Development Goal number 5. We need to ensure that these are translated into the national human rights laws, electoral and political party laws, and other relevant frameworks. The second action I would propose or recommendation is for us to pursue the quota system with all vigor. Many countries implement the quota system. Some don't agree with it. They think women should struggle in the same way as men, but I believe we should pursue it with all vigor because it has been found to be one of the most efficient ways to bring women into leadership. The quota system aims to ensure that women constitute a large minority of between 20 to 40%, or even more radically, to ensure true gender balance of 50 to 50. In some countries, this is a temporary measure to give women the space to participate and later the confidence to stand for elections as candidates who have succeeded in their service as nominated candidates and gained a true constituency. We need to review also the financial requirements for women to register for their candidacy. This should be significantly reduced compared to those of men. Otherwise, the game will continue to be unfair. The third is a look at institutional structures. For example, within Parliament, we have found women's caucuses in Parliament to be very good in giving them the opportunity to work across party lines to pursue agendas of common interest. This gives them solidarity. It gives them a powerful voice to challenge discriminatory laws and policies and to support peaceful transitions. It is their success in Parliament that can help guarantee their re-election. So such caucuses, as they really help them to be successful in their time in Parliament, are something that we need to support. Then we need to look at women's capacity, mentorship, training, and networking to increase their confidence, increase their abilities, and help ensure that they succeed in their leadership journey. We worked, when I was regional director for UN Women, we established the Africa Center for Transformative and Inclusive Leadership. And this was modeled on the MCTC in Israel. And we worked with MCTC to establish it in Kenyatta University. And it's still going on, even after I have left. It is doing a great job in preparing women for transformative leadership in politics and in agribusiness. There needs to also be party-based grooming schemes, which we have seen in many countries. And also, I would propose buffer programs for women who have campaigned and not succeeded. Usually such women are dropped, and it's difficult for them to rise up again and come back. So what is the psychosocial support we can give, roadmaps to recovery and to their return to the political arena? Media engagement and commitment to this process is essential. And we need to ensure that women's security is an integral part of political and electoral processes. We, for example, in Kenya in 2013, we established the Women's Situation Room during the elections, which had 500 observers around the country. And it coordinated very timely reports of incidences and potential incidences, which were dealt with very quickly in our partnership with the Inspector General of Police. So those systems are very important, especially these days when things erupt very quickly. And with social media, news that would not normally travel very fast reaches different parts of communities and society very quickly, which could lead to a spiraling of violence that is unexpected. There are many, many, many other issues, and I look forward to everyone contributing to this conversation. So in conclusion, I believe that if we are to achieve equal participation of women in decision-making, we must be committed to a 50-50 agenda, not to a 20, 30, 33% agenda, because the ambition will enable us to find more transformative solutions. We need to go beyond the usual quotas. That kind of agenda will, with clear timeframes, will enable us to question and reverse our basic discriminatory norms, attitudes, and practices. We need specifically to target the custodians of these norms, to provide incentives for those who succeed, and to take action against those who violate the democratic rights of women. In some countries, family-focused interventions will be important, especially where customary law is more respected. All this would be in vain, of course, if women themselves, if us women do not rise up to the challenge. Thank you very much for your attention. As we say in Swahili, asanteni sana.
Thank you so much, Christine, for your illuminating words, as always, and everything you brought up, norms and what's going on today in the world. I think it's just so important, and I know that what you spoke about will intertwine with what Professor Adai also will be bringing up. So I think this is a great, the global's perspective and what's going on in Israel. And I think this will be a very, very interesting discussion. I thank you so much for taking the time. Rana, do we have something in the chat that for Christine, or shall we wait till the end?
No, I do not see any questions currently, but please feel free to write them in the chat box, or if anyone has a question right now, maybe to ask, or we can wait till the end of the session. That's also a possibility.
Great. So maybe after we hear Professor Adai as well, you will put everything together, and you're welcome to ask questions. So again, thank you very much. As Ms. Mosisi has been in so many capacities, so many organizations, UN Habitat, UN Women, UNDP, and has had many pivotal positions. She's really coming to us with a vast amount of and knowledge of what's going on in the world. And we do appreciate learning from you every time. And of course, working with you to set up ACTIL in Kenya at the Kenyatta University was a great challenge, and working with you was amazing. So we thank you very much. And if you can stay on, we would appreciate it.
Yes,
can you
I will
stay
stay
on?
on. Thank you.
Great. So maybe we'll have more questions later on. So thank you very much. I now have the honor, the great honor of, and we have the pleasure of having with us today Professor Frances Radai. She is very, very well known in Israel, but I will present her to you, as I don't know if all of you are familiar with her and her amazing work. Professor Radai serves as chairperson of the working group of the United Nations Human Rights Committee examining discrimination against women. She currently heads the Concord Institute for the Study of Absorption of International Law in Israel. Professor Radai formerly served as member of CEDAW, the United Nations Committee to Eliminate All Forms of Discrimination Against Women. Professor Radai also serves as chairperson of the advisory committee to the Commission for Equal Opportunities in Work. She has written numerous books and articles, just one that came out last year, 2020, I think, which was amazing, and we'll give you the link to the book so that you can read it. It's very, very interesting. And I'm sure she will mention the things, so I won't go into it. But we will write to you. We'll send you a link. Professor Radai is written about human rights, labor law, religion, and human rights, feminist theory, and has represented numerous petitioners in groundbreaking Supreme Court cases concerning claims for rights in the fields of labor law, human rights, and discrimination. She is a well-known persona in Israel, and she has started the Women's Network. She has done so much work that I will let her, I could go on and on. So Professor Radai, thank you so much for agreeing to join us today. We know you're super, super busy, and see, one good thing about COVID that we're on Zoom. So there is some plus in all of that. So thank you very much, and I'll give you the floor. And again, thank you so much.
Well, thank you, Hava, for an amazing introduction. It just shows how long I've been around when you say all the things I've done. And I wanted to say Asantani Sana to Christine Mosisi for a really very knowledgeable and optimistic in some ways presentation of the international situation of women, global situation of women. I've been asked today to talk about Israel, and we'll come along with the good, the bad, and the indifferent, and we'll see what's going on and compare it with the global picture. Today, I'll discuss the following aspects of women in public life: the political, the economic, the army, and religious institutions, because all these come together to really define women's opportunities in the public space. And economics maybe are even more important than politics today in determining the way we all live. So I'm going to go through those various things and talk about women's situation as regards to each of these things. And I'm going to start with women's political life. Well, Israel, of course, was fairly famous for the Golda Meir, one of the first prime ministers in the world who was a woman. And she was a very strong woman, a very strong personality, and she came along with the myth of equality, which was because also of girl soldiers in the army. I'll be talking about girls in the army. The idea of seeing Israeli girls who were being conscripted to the army carrying guns in those days was, both of them gave a very strong vision of Israel as being a highly egalitarian country for women. There was some truth in the myth. It's not all myth. It is true that Golda Meir was prime minister. Women were then doing better in Israel than in many other countries in terms of the judiciary, higher education, in various aspects of their lives, and the army, of course. But it was also a myth to think that women had equal opportunity to men's opportunity in public life, partly because presence is not necessarily power. Women may be present, and that came also from the previous lecture, women may be present in parliament and not necessarily in decision-making bodies, in central decision-making bodies in parliament. So we have to distinguish between presence and power. Well, in Israel today, there's nothing to be particularly proud of. Parliamentary representation is about 30% women. So as we just discussed, when women are more than 50% of the population, this is a great achievement compared with the past, if we go back 50 odd years, but it's not where we want to be. There is no quota requirement by law, but two of the political parties have informal quota systems themselves. And as Christine Moussisi said, the quotas are a very good, if not an almost essential way of getting more women into political life, into parliament. And in fact, one has to maintain them. It has, we went in the working group on discrimination against women, when we looked into quota systems, we found that they don't only have to introduce women to parliament, they have to keep them there. You have to keep the quota systems going because there's still so much mitigating against women managing to succeed in political life. Of the 39 political parties in Israel, that's a lot of political parties. Most of them are not very significant, but quite a lot of them are multiple party system. There was only one headed by a woman in the elections, which were completed this most recent election, where the government was sworn in yesterday. So it was Merav Michaeli of the Labour Party is the only leader of a party. Now that is, of course, demonstrates the fact that how hard it is for women to break through in the party system. In the religious parties, we have some parties that are religious parties. And in the religious political parties, women are excluded, are often excluded. That is especially true of two parties, Shas and Agudas Israel. Against both of those parties, I've been involved in court cases saying that it's not just lack of affirmative action, it's pure discrimination against women. If you have no women representing you in the parliament, no political candidates who are women, and who by ideology you do not want women in your political party, that is discrimination. You're not asking for affirmative action to get women into the party. You're asking for the prohibition of discrimination by these political parties. We argued in court, and we succeeded to a large extent in saying that religious conviction cannot justify discrimination against women. And that, of course, is the position that we took in the Working Group on Discrimination Against Women, and the special rapporteurs on freedom of religion also took this position, that religious conviction cannot justify discriminating against women. It was a decision also of the European Court of Human Rights as regards with a confessional Christian party in Holland, where they were not allowing women to be candidates for parliament. So the European Court of Human Rights said this is discrimination against women, and the religious convictions cannot justify it. In government, representation of women is approximately a third, so it's around the same level. In the present government is said to be the highest yet. We have 9 out of 28 members of the government, ministers, are women. The women have not, on this occasion, been restricted to feminized ministries like social ministries, family ministries, and so on. They have been included in transport and economy, but nevertheless, they're not in what is considered, they've not become ministers on what are considered the central ministries, which are the Ministry of Defense, the Ministry of Finance, and the Ministry of Foreign Affairs. So they have not yet been appointed to those ministries in this government. So the situation is we need quotas in Israel. There have been several attempts to get quota laws for women in parliament, and they've all failed. And one of the reasons they failed is because the religious parties have opposed them, because they don't want women at all in parliament, on their lists in parliament. And the attempts to get legislation have concentrated on ceasing the funding. There is state funding for political parties in Israel. So we argued also in court that these are public bodies. They're supported by the public purse, and therefore, and they also are the constituent institutions of democracy. So there must be equal representation of women, and we do not yet have it. The Israeli media and public discourse, which again, Christine Moussissi discussed, how important it is for women politicians to be represented fairly in the media and in public discourse, because that is the main way of becoming known and being elected. Well, there is sexist discourse, of course, a concentration on women politicians' appearance. There have been researches done in Israel to show that there is greater concentration on the way women look than on the way men look, on the way they dress rather than the way men dress. And what is perhaps even worse than that is that there are fewer media appearances. Approximately 90%, research showed recently that approximately 90% of politicians featured across Israeli television channels and radio stations were men. So that 10% of women is even lower than their 30% in parliament. They're getting less media coverage than the men are, significantly less media coverage than the men are. And so this is a barrier, and it's an essential to require the television channels and the radio channels to fairly interview women politicians. The ultra-Orthodox radio station didn't allow women's voices to be heard at all on the channel. Well, there was a petition to the Supreme Court here too, and the Supreme Court ruled that that was prohibited. It was discrimination against women, prohibited discrimination, and the court imposed a fine of 1 million shekels on the radio channel and forced them to start presenting women's voices. Meirav Michaeli, who is a feminist, the one-woman leader of a political party, has been using, in Hebrew, you use a male form and a female form. So she's been insisting on using both a male and a female form in her speech. He, she, rather than he or she. He, she, do this, and he, and so on. And there's been considerable mocking of her for that, but she nevertheless managed to lead the party and is in the Knesset now and is going to be the Minister of Transport. So that's a success, but she had to overcome that. I'm going to show you a short video about women in the Israeli army, because that is very unique to Israel. And as I show it to you, you will see that the army both is very enabling for women in public life and also restricting. It's a double-edged sword. It's both advances women's equality and limits them. So let me just put it up for you. It's a short video, and it will give you a little glimpse into one of the things that is rather unique to Israel. Now then, I'm going to see if I can do this. Wait a moment. Wait a moment. Can you hear it or not hear it yet? Hello?
Not yet.
I can hear it right now,
You know what?
Frances.
Maybe I'll ask you to put it up if you could.
No
Rana.
problem. Give me 2 seconds.
Yes. It will be easier.
למה אני אוהבת בינס?
לדעתי זה הכי טרי והכי טעים שיש.
אני מקווה נכונה.
Israel is one of only 9 countries in the world with mandatory military
can't
service
see
for
it.
men and women.
We can't
Israelis
see
are
it.
usually drafted at age.
Rana, we can't
You
actually
can only
see.
hear it and not see the video.
Yes.
It's a black
You have to
screen.
share your screen to see it too. Can you do that?
Sorry about that. I just need to share it from this other screen because I had to go first and get the link. So bear with me for 2 seconds.
Age 18 right after high school, with women in non-combat roles serving in the IDF for 24 months, while men and women in combat roles serve for a minimum of 30. Although many women in the IDF serve in combat and hold high-level officer positions, it wasn't always this way. How did women challenge the norms and achieve senior ranks in the army? Out of necessity, Israel was the first country in modern history to make military service mandatory for both sexes. The policy started during the War of Independence when 5 surrounding countries invaded the new Jewish state. David Ben-Gurion, Israel's first prime minister, created a people's army and enlisted all Israeli citizens regardless of sex. As he said, "Security will not exist if our nation's women do not know how to fight." Because of that decision, women bravely fought alongside men in the War for Independence. Many women earned honorable distinctions for their military service. And then there were those who made the ultimate sacrifice. After a harrowing case of capture, rape, and then abuse of a fallen woman's corpse by enemy forces, the IDF decided to remove women from combat positions in 1948, only a few months after the formation of the state. From 1949, women soldiers served under the Women's Corps, which had a completely different chain of command and its own training, discipline, and judicial systems, while being stationed within other IDF units. Dr. Sharon Geva, professor of history and gender at Tel Aviv University, notes that the IDF justified gender segregation due to a generally shared societal concern against making women rough and tough. Serving in these silos, women often missed out on many benefits that Army service provides. Serving in the military is an opportunity to develop important relationships and lasting friendships. The gender inequality of military life carries over to civilian society. Sometimes military experience is the deciding factor in a job interview, even more than education or other professional experience. Between connections, specialized training, and experience in high-level combat positions, Army service can be a huge advantage. In 1982, the IDF once again placed women behind enemy lines during the First Lebanon War. Though still not in combat roles, women made up 30% of the military, and the incursion into Lebanon demanded as many soldiers as possible. Things stayed more or less the same until 1995. That year, Alice Miller, a South African immigrant, was denied the chance to try out to be a combat pilot in the prestigious Israeli Air Force Flight Academy. Miller possessed a civilian pilot's license and was pursuing a degree in aeronautical engineering. While there had been a number of female transportation pilots, the military denied her request to even be considered for combat training. So Miller sued the Army. The case ended up in front of the Israeli Supreme Court, where Miller argued for women's equality. The Supreme Court ruled in Miller's favor. Women's combat exemption remained, but they now had the option to pursue it. While Miller won the case, she was subsequently rejected from the pilot training program for medical reasons. Although a step in the right direction, the ramifications of the case wouldn't happen overnight. The first units with female combat soldiers included the Rocket Artillery Unit and the Homefront Command Search and Rescue Brigade. Women also patrolled the mostly peaceful Jordanian border in the Caracal Unit. From there, more and more military branches opened up to women, such as the K-9 Unit, Oketz, and the Field Intelligence Corps. By 2003, 2020, women filled more than 25% of officer positions. Aiming to equalize women's military roles further, the 2007 SEGEV committee set forth a vision of what a more integrated IDF might look like over the next decade. It called for a review of IDF drafting protocols, which hadn't been updated since the 50s. Since men serve for longer periods, they had priority for certain jobs, which required longer training. The SEGEV report recommended not only opening up all roles to women, but also making the length of service based on the soldier's position instead of gender. It recommended quotas to ensure women have a significant presence in senior ranks and outlined a gender code, which prescribed behavior norms between the sexes. The IDF Rabbinate objected to the SEGEV report and refused to endorse putting women on the front lines, fearing it would force religious male soldiers serving in co-ed units to compromise their values. Senior officers in the IDF argued that most female soldiers couldn't handle the physical demands of serving in combat. Thus, much of the report was never fully integrated into policy. Women have also faced harassment during their time in the Army. In 2016, an internal survey by the IDF showed that 1 out of every 6 women in service had been sexually harassed. Despite setbacks to full integration, women continue to move up in the Army. In 2001, the first female fighter pilot graduated from the Israeli Air Force Academy. In 2011, the IDF promoted its first female major general and its first field unit commander in 2014. In 2016, the Artillery Corps' prestigious drone unit appointed the first woman to head the unit. The first female infantry battalion executive officer was appointed in 2017, later going on to become a battalion commander. 2018 saw 2 female pilots, only known to the public as Lieutenant Colonel T and Lieutenant Colonel G, become the first female commanders of an air control squadron and flight squadron, respectively. 2018 also marked the first 4 female soldiers to become tank commanders. In September 2020, Lieutenant Colonel Efrat Kaikov-Levy became the first female commander of an artillery battalion. And in November 2020, it was announced that a 3rd female battalion commander will be appointed in the Field Intelligence Corps. This is only a fraction of the women achieving new heights of leadership in the IDF. Every year, more and more opportunities continue to be seized by Israeli women determined to not let anything hold them back as they redefine the notions of what a female soldier is capable of. They continue to lead the transformation of an ever-modernizing defense force. These women have greatly expanded their roles in the military over the decades, and they have come increasingly closer to achieving full equality. Both women and men can now benefit from the structure, connection, networking, and job training that are a part of Army service. Although women in the IDF have made history in achieving senior command roles, they continue to experience setbacks and discrimination today. But with more opportunities than almost any modern military in the world, they will continue to redefine what it means to be a soldier in the IDF and continue to protect and serve their country.
Thank you. So, you know, here we see, we come back to, I'll share my screen again. Sorry. Oops. Then I'll share my, no. What I wanted to show is this. I'm sharing my, am I sharing my screen again?
No, Frances, you're not. If you like, I can put it on for you.
No, I'll try and put it back on.
It was, okay.
Yeah, shall I try and put it back on? How do I do that? I think maybe I'll let you put it back. And I don't know how you switch back to me. So I'll let you put it on for now, Efrat. Yeah, no, that's not good because then I can't move it over. So let me put it back on myself. I'll try and put it back on, sharing the screen, okay? Just 1 moment, sorry. I'll talk about this as I'm doing it. Of course, you see all the advantages and disadvantages of women in this program. Firstly, of course, it is partly, I'm sharing the screen now. Can you see it? Can you see my screen?
Yes, we can see it.
Good, okay. So, of course, it's partly instrumentalist. The Israeli army used women because it needed them. It needed their input, which is always a question. Secondly, even though they have made enormous progress in advancement in the army, they still, as they said in this presentation, have barriers to their promotion, and their army service does not always bring the same rewards in civilian life as it does for men. It's called parachuting out of the army into top-level positions, which women do far less than men do. There is also a problem of for many feminists whether how much army service can ever be regarded by feminists as a wonderful thing to do. So there are lots of problems in it. It's not altogether clear, but you can see that only now, in very recent years, although women have been in the Israeli army and conscripted to the Israeli army since the creation of the state, you can see that it's the last 2 or 3 years, 4 years, 5 years, that they're really beginning to break through to high-level command positions, which also shows how slow the process can be. Moving from that to women in the economy, of course, the army is both public life in some sense, because the army is a state institution, and it's also economic. And women in the economy, we have, I'm going to look at the gender policies, which give women opportunities in the economy. But before I do so, I want to go back to something that that Christine said in her lecture about it was going to take 100 years or more, 100 to 130 years for women to get equality in the political sphere. Well, the World Economic Forum reckons that for women to get equality in the economic sphere will take 217 years, almost twice as long as getting equality in the political sphere. And I think that that's not altogether intuitive. I must say, when I started writing about women in the economy, I was not aware that the prediction is that it will be harder for women to get equality in economic life than in political life. But that is the case. So the legal framework for equality for women in Israel is quite good. We have an equal employment opportunity law, which since the last century, since 1988, there's very little litigation under the equal employment opportunity law. Those cases which are brought by plaintiffs are largely successful. But for women to sue under the equal employment opportunity law is a problem, because women who are employed don't want to risk their employment by suing their employer. And if they leave the workplace, then they go to court because of unfair dismissal or discriminatory dismissal. But these are rarer cases and often settled. So an equal employment opportunity law is there in theory. We all know that employees don't sue their employers unless they're out of the job. They don't want, and if they do, they pay a heavy price for it. There is equal pay and equal pay for work of equal value laws. And again, very little litigation. Those cases which have been brought have been successful, but the cases that have been brought about equal pay rather than equal pay for work of equal value. And it's not because it's so difficult to prove equal pay for work of equal value that the pay was unequal for work of equal value. And the law itself allows the court to require public financing of the analysis of occupational analysis that you need to prove your case. Nevertheless, women have not taken that up, and there's very little litigation on it. Pension age and pension gaps. There was a big fight about this in Israel, and actually I was one of the people who led the fight. Originally, as in many countries, women were required to retire 5 years earlier than men. So I went to the labor courts first and tried to ask the labor courts to say that this was discrimination against women, to require them to retire 5 years before men. And the labor court said, well, you know, it's not been in the legislation. The Equal Employment Opportunity Law doesn't talk about pension age, retirement age, and therefore we will not intervene. So I went up to the Supreme Court, and the Supreme Court ruled in favor of my petitioners. They were women, they were doctors, they were professors of medicine, and the Supreme Court ruled that they could not be required to retire 5 years earlier than men, which, I mean, I have to say that as I fought this case, which was completed in 1990, I was absolutely astounded that the hospital authorities, as soon as faced with highly successful women who wanted to go on working and save the hospital's pension fund, were not prepared to let them go on working. And I'd like to tell this anecdote. Professor Tirza Cohen, who was one of the professors of medicine whom I represented, after we won the case, didn't only work to the age that men retired, 65. The hospital asked her to continue to the age of 68. And when she reached the age of 68, the hospital asked her to continue to the age of 70. And when she reached the age of 70, she was a professor of genetics. The hospital asked her to continue working. And she said, no, if I don't retire now, I'll never be able to do a course in accounting, which I've wanted to do all my life. So I'm leaving anyway. But the case is so important because it shows that prejudice and stereotypes can be so much stronger than reality. Once the stereotype was broken of women have to retire earlier, the hospital could acknowledge that she was an outstanding employee and wanted her to work till an older age than the men, not to retire before them. So the other aspect of the legal framework, the policy framework, the legal policy framework is affirmative action. And in the civil service, the law provides for a kind of affirmative action for both women and Arab employees and Ethiopians. And they don't have a definite quota, but it's called a fair representation. It's required both for civil service positions and for membership of boards of directors in government companies and in public companies. And the Supreme Court extended it to all public employment positions, not just the civil service and not just the boards of directors of government corporations. And we'll see what that did in terms of numbers. Women in the economy in numbers. So what is the impact of these equal employment opportunity laws, equal pay laws, affirmative action laws? What is the impact? I've shown here with AA the positions, the areas where women are subject to affirmative action policies and those which they have not. Equal pay laws are not affirmative action, it's prohibition of discrimination only. So when you see director generals of government ministries, that's the director general is the absolute pinnacle of the civil service, 39% of the director generals of government ministries are women. Well, looks like a big success, 40% nearly, but it's much less of a success when you realize that more than 60% of the employees of the civil service are women, and that the profile of academic qualifications of this 60% of women is higher than the profile of the male employees in the civil service. So although there are more than, there are 60%, almost 2/3, and they have higher academic qualifications, women are still only 39% of director generals. Boards of directors of government companies, well, of private companies first. In private companies, women are only 10% of boards of directors. In public companies, is 24%, and that is the result of affirmative action. Before the affirmative action was taken, and I was involved in amending the law, the government companies law, to require fair representation for women on the boards of government companies. Before that, only 2% of the company boards were women. So as soon as you got a requirement that you had to consider women for the post and give them fair representation, it went up almost immediately to 24%, and that's where it has more or less stayed. Again, you see, nowhere near the 50% line, but certainly improved as compared to private companies. Sorry, that's public companies. Sorry, public companies. In government companies, we've got up to 43%. Sorry, I just messed up those figures. In government companies, we've got up to 43%. It started off at 25%, and we've got up to 43%. When you look at the fact that affirmative action is affecting things like boards of directors, maybe you begin to understand why women in politics have a chance of reaching equality in 100 years, whereas in the economy, they don't have a chance for 200 years or more than 200 years. And that is that in the economy, nobody's trying to really introduce quotas in private economic sectors. They may prohibit discrimination, which we do, equal employment opportunity laws, equal pay laws, but we do not impose quotas. And so you see that even in the economic sphere, you need quotas if you want to increase the representation of women. CEOs, public companies, 2.4%. Now this is the reverse. There's no affirmative action. But in public companies, there's only 2.4% of the public companies researched had female CEOs. And in general, they found in the 43,520 companies they researched that there were 22% of women CEOs. Now, how can one understand that? That is a figure that is not true only of Israel. You find it in other countries too. Well, it's because in private companies, you may have women CEOs in family-owned businesses, in other words, where there are different criteria for appointing a woman CEO. Women who inherited private companies and inherited positions and so on. Whereas in public companies, where there is no affirmative action, you have such a low level of CEOs. What about universities and colleges? Well, full professors, this is also a quasi-public sphere of life. Well, full professors are 16.6%. And that is in spite of the fact that 29% of professors, that includes assistant professors, are women, and 37% of senior lecturers are women. So you say, aha, the pyramid. And when you ask people who are not involved in feminist studies and in feminist advocacy, you know, you say this is discrimination. They say, well, no, it's going to take time. But actually, it's not just a question of time, because these figures are rather similar to the figures 40 years ago. And 40 years ago, it was 12% of full professors. So from 12 to 16% of full professors is not just it's not just that they're taking time to come through the system. 40 years is long enough to get through the system and become full professor. So we see there that there are problems in promotion within universities and colleges. And we found that incidentally in the CEDAW committee and in the working group on discrimination against women. We found it in very, very gender equal countries like Finland, which had a very high level rating on the gender gap index. Nevertheless, university professors, full professors, women were a rather low percentage. The gender wage gap. Well, the gender wage gap, in spite of the fact that we have all the legislation required by the ILO, required by CEDAW, we have all that legislation in place. Nevertheless, the gender wage gap is 22.69%. And Israel is ranked as one of the 3 OECD countries with the highest wage gap. The OECD average gender wage gap is 12.89%. It's just over half. I don't have a full understanding of why this is, except maybe that Israel not only it used to have a very, very fully developed childcare system at a very low cost for women, and that has disappeared as the state has become more and more neoliberal in its economic policies and less socialistic. But also the school day is a short school day. We do not have a long school day. And I suspect that the wage gap is related, that the fact that Israel has a higher wage gap than other OECD countries may well be related to the expense of childcare and the short school day. I wanted to look at the gendered impact of COVID. We knew when we did research into this in the Working Group for Discrimination Against Women, economic crises increased gender gaps. In 2008, with the austerity measures, we saw there was a severe impact on women's employment, more severe than men's initially, and there was some correction later, but women took the brunt of the economic crisis. COVID actually has been even more severe than the 2008 economic crisis in its impact on women. Because whereas in the economic crisis, some women went on having childcare, going on with their jobs and so on, using childcare and going on with their jobs and so on, in COVID, you had this total breakdown of the babysitting function of kindergartens and schools. Israel had one of the longest periods of school closure during COVID, and women were then more than men, disproportionately with men, returned to childcare duties. And not only were they passive childcare duties, Zoom meant that women were required to become the educators of their children. There was some really, I mean, if one has a sense of humor, hilarious video clips of women rushing around to 3 or 4 children, trying to do the lessons with each one of them on different Zooms, on different topics from different schools, and trying to remain sane. So this really has impacted enormously women's employment. The loss of paid employment for women in Israel was 17.6%, and for men, 3.8%, an enormous difference. When I look at economic crises, and we were very careful to do this in the working group as well, it's not the economic crisis that causes women's disadvantage. It's the economic crisis or the COVID crisis, the pandemic, which exposes women's vulnerability in the economic sphere. So it's like, it's the pathology of women's economic situation. It's not a cause in and of itself. So that's why it's very important to look at it and to realize that the things that are going wrong in the crisis are things that have to be put right if women are going to have equal opportunity, equal economic opportunity when there's no crisis. We have had a specific situation in Israel, which is not only in Israel. It's a question of a growing demand of certain religious institutions for gendered modesty in the public space. This is not a solely Israeli situation. There, in the Human Rights Council, there has been quite a lot of controversy as regards resolutions of the Human Rights Council, which have said that we should be returning to traditional values in our interpretation of human rights. And in fact, in the Council, there were a number of such resolutions which had a majority of states voting for them. All the international human rights NGOs have been fighting against this and have pointed out that traditional values are a regression for women. They violate or will violate women's human rights and equal opportunity. So Israel is a specific incidence of this. We have had a number of issues where the women have been fighting to retain equality in the public space. Well, the first was the Western Wall. And it's largely in religious institutions, but they impact the public sphere. So the Western Wall, women asked to pray as men do, with prayer shawls, and the Torah and out loud, and the religious, the Orthodox, the ultra-Orthodox, and the Orthodox religious communities objected. And we went to court. And the court said that they did have freedom of worship, but it couldn't be exercised if it injured the sensitivities of other people praying in the vicinity. So it's not. We had some successes, but it's not yet succeeded. And I thought it was a very important case because it's true that it was religious women claiming equality within religion, but they were doing so in the public space of the country. And in the public space of the country, one has to establish equality norms, and religious conviction should not defeat those equality norms. And we have it in public buses. Public buses to religious neighborhoods were segregated. Men sat at the front, women at the back. So women who didn't want to sit at the back of the bus went to the court, and the Supreme Court decided in their favor and said it was discrimination to segregate women on buses. However, women who wanted to sit separately could sit separately, and the back door should be kept open for those women who wanted to sit separately. That is a decision that is problematic. But we also know that in India is being regarded as one way of dealing with sexual harassment, to provide the alternative of a separate accommodation for women on public transport. So it's a very tricky question, which I won't go into in depth here. In institutions of higher education, religious men, young men and women, have asked for segregated classes, and the male students do not want to be educated by female professors. The female students agree to be educated by both. We are back in court with that. I'm back in court on that. And the petition to the Supreme Court is pending. We don't yet know what the court is going to decide. We claim that that is discrimination against women professors, and also is contrary to the ethos of higher education for students as well. The male and female students have to be in classes where they see and hear each other. The Attorney General's report in 2014 said that separation in the public sphere is discrimination, and yet, in spite of that, the government decided to accept the Attorney General's report, and yet in spite of that, we see that the arguments are going on, the disputes are going on in different sectors of public life. I'd like to leave the floor open for questions about either the national or the international. And so I'm going to sum up here and say what we see in the Israeli case is what we see globally. Enormous progress in some ways, an enormous change of perspective as regards what women are capable of doing and of women's own perception of what they can do, and enormous challenges. On one hand, the progress needs to be accelerated, because though there is progress, 100 years is too long in politics, and 200 years is too long in the economic sphere. And that's an understatement to say that these periods are far too long. So we need to accelerate equality for women, and we need to be on guard to prevent regression. And there is, in my view, a backlash of traditionalist, usually religious institutions who would like to turn the clock back on women's equality. So we need to both accelerate the equality that we have and protect it against regression. So I'm going to ask, I'd be delighted to have questions.
Okay, thank you.
All comments.
Thank you very, very much, Professor Radai. Your talk was enlightening in so many spheres. You touched on many important issues to all of us, and I think having this international forum, as you said, that most of us, if not all of us, have the same challenges, and COVID was really an eye-opener, where we saw many things in a different view, and as you said, women with taking care of children, etc. So many things were brought to light, and I think this is we have a chance now to talk together, to hear questions. We saw a few questions on the chat, and I think we're here to learn best practices from each other as well. Part of it was a little pessimistic. I don't know if I'll be able to live another 200 years and see this, so I'm a little nervous now, but you never know. So let's now, Rama, let's hear the questions and comments. I'll pass it over to you.
All right.
For Christine, for Professor Radai, please.
Yes, so the first question is actually for both our wonderful speakers. So the first question is, communities are used to hearing about women empowerment with low actions. What innovative or creative ideas are there to promote women empowerment, in your opinion? So who would like to take the question?
I'm prepared to start and say we really have to do something that has hardly been done, in my opinion, and that is we have to start with school education. We have to teach, we have to have core syllabus, compulsory core syllabus of human rights and women's human rights from the very word go in kindergartens and in schools, in order to prepare people, the young people, children and young people, for a very different attitude to women's partnership with men and mutual empowerment.
Right. I completely agree with you, Professor Radai. It all starts with education, and it's a very important aspect if we really want to change things, if we want to change reality. Thank you so much. Christine, would you like to take the question?
Yes, actually, I do agree very much with Professor Radai about human rights education right from the beginning. But also building through perhaps peer education. I have seen peer education work very well, not necessarily for leadership, but for addressing HIV and AIDS in Ukraine. And where you build a critical mass of very young leaders who ended up educating their own peers, but also influencing their communities, their parents, and giving them new knowledge, information, and so on. And we also found in Kyrgyzstan at a time when most of the lists for nominees were coming from from the center to the communities and to the regions for political office. When we held community dialogues and strategic community conversations around women's leadership, you found that many women were willing to actually be nominated, and others were willing to, and community members were willing to nominate women when they fully understood that it is actually possible and it would bring benefits to the community. So engaging at that level during a process of preparing for elections can lead to very concrete results, very, within a space of time where you actually see the results happening. So those are just two things that I thought would be useful.
Thank you so much, Christine, for your answer and for the great examples that you gave. The next question is kind of delicate. It's about women's solidarity. So elected women are not really contributing to empowerment of women's position. Are there any suggestions on how to work on increasing awareness and solidarity? So again, to both our lecturers.
You want to go first, Christine?
Okay, let me give this one a try. I think there's usually one question a woman asks. It's already a huge burden to be in public office and also take care of my family, because I'm not a parliamentarian at home. I'm not a CEO at home. I'm still a mother and, a wife, So do you then want me to carry the burden for all the women in the world or in the country? It's sometimes seen in that way. But I think that when women are helped to understand the value of investing in women's equality and gender equality and women's empowerment, the fact that it's not only good for other women, but it's good for them as well. First of all, because they will be able to demonstrate results. They will get support for re-election if there are real results that impact other people, especially women. I think that women in parliament also need to recognize that if they support women in business to excel through the various laws and women in government, that eventually they will have a critical mass in parliament, because they will have women in business who can afford to actually be in, to stand for elections. So it helps where you have initiatives that have very strong orientation programs for new elected officials. For example, in many countries, we have been able to influence orientation and training programs for new parliamentarians, and in ensuring that gender equality and awareness is part of that program. So it always helps to integrate those elements in the regular training programs. Thank you.
Yeah, well, that's, I would like to add to that, very helpful comment. And firstly, there was research done that showed that women CEOs were advancing women up the corporate pipeline in their companies more than male CEOs. So it does happen that there is women's solidarity in some ways. I think that that we have to remember that though representation of women is enormously important, not all women who are representatives are feminists. Not all of them are social democrats. They are across the board in different political attitudes and different social attitudes. And in many ways, that is the way it has to be, because we think that women contribute in every framework that they function in. They are half of the sky and half of the earth, and they should be represented as such, because society is dual, male and female. And in order to get a proper perspective, you need both of them represented. But it doesn't promise you that when a woman is promoted, she has necessarily got a feminist consciousness, or a socialist consciousness, or an egalitarian consciousness. It does not mean that. So you have to, I think, be aware of that. That does not mean that, I mean, there is an importance in women's representation per se, for itself, but there is also an importance in promoting women who do understand women's disadvantage, and that women's equality and it needs to be encouraged. It's not going to arrive on its own, and that and who are going to have to promote that as their agenda. So so you have to have the dual approach, both the agenda and the male or female representative, or both. I think that is the main thing. I have seen a lot of women supporting women, and so I think that that we should look at the good examples as well, and praise them, and praise those good examples. That's the best I can do on this question.
Perfect. Thank you.
I fully agree with you. There are so many great examples, and we need to put them out there for people to see. Thank you.
Yeah.
Thank you
May
so
I just
much.
add one other thing? NGOs, women's NGO. In Israel, there was the Israel Women's Network was very successful in providing support for women politicians by NGO support, women in society, and academic women, where we supported women candidates, and we would have meetings with them, and we would try and have training sessions for women candidates. So there is also a big opportunity for women's organizations, civil society organizations, to contribute to women's solidarity.
All right, thank you so much to both of you. The next question I have is for Professor Radai. Professor, do you think that more women in some significant fields like armed forces can have a spillover effect for women empowerment in other fields like politics and society?
Well, as I said, it doesn't work as well as it should. It definitely does not work as well as it should. There are many examples of women who did get very high up in the armed forces, and they did not get the opportunities in civil society that the men who reached their positions got. It does not seem to play off the same way for women as for men. I have to admit that I wrote an article on women in the military, which I called A Feminist Catch-22. On one hand, women cannot forego the chance of the image and the function of being equal in something as important as an army institution, where army is so central to life as it is in the Israeli political and economic scene. On the other hand, it's something of a catch-22. It's probably one of the last places where women will get complete equality. That's military institutions and religious institutions. I mean, the Pope has just appointed a woman administrator, but women in Catholicism can still not be leaders in the priesthood. So I think that military and religious institutions are places where women are going to have to still achieve greater equality. And I don't think that they are the key to women's equality, is what I'm trying to say. I think it's important to go on demanding equality there. I don't think that they're the key to women's equality. I'm trying to move because somehow the sun's coming in, and I think you can't see me. So I'm trying to move over somewhere where I can be seen. Sorry.
Yeah. No, yeah, now we can see you perfectly.
Yes.
Thank you. All right, the next question, I can see more questions coming in. Will you hear, you will hear a lot from men saying that most empowerment programs are geared at women and children, and that there are few programs targeting men. What strategies could be used targeting men geared at widening their perspective insight on women's capacity to lead and therefore how to work alongside them? To both our lecturers.
Well, Christine, I don't know. I don't have much to say about this. I do have to regard men as partners, but and some men are partners. My own efforts to involve men, I've rarely found men as committed to women's equality as women are. I'm going to say it humorously, but that's my experience.
Yeah, I mean, in when I was with UN Women, and I think UN Women has continued this He for She campaign. I don't know if you've all heard about it, where you know, the organization is pushing for male champions to take up this responsibility and to advocate for gender equality and women's empowerment. And, you know, it has worked in some cases, especially where you have, you know, very well-known and prominent corporate leaders who also then incorporate, you know, those principles into their organizations and companies. For example, there are what we call the WEPs, the Women Empowerment Principles. There are 10 principles that if a company, you know, takes them up and implements them, and most, you know, CEOs, as you know, are men, you know, then, you know, the company is very much likely to, you know, to be more, you know, responsive to gender equality and more committed to women's empowerment. And they will, of course, enjoy the results of higher profits and better, more sustainable business as a result of being more gender responsive. So I think that is a very good, you know, it is at least leading to some level of commitment and results. The other is, I think, recruitment. There's always a tension, especially in women's organizations or agencies that are targeting gender equality and women's empowerment to hire men. Because on the one hand, we want to hire men in order to partner with them, in order to sometimes reach places that are difficult for us to reach. On the other hand, you are saying, but women are less, you know, have less access to jobs than men. Why are you giving the man this job? That is a tension that, to be honest, I do not have an answer for. It is I think it is a decision of whoever is recruiting, but it's important that we are aware of that. For example, we have found men very effective in moving along with women on issues of gender budgeting, you know, and you know, it has always worked where you have a man and a woman working on gender budgeting, but you know, it's really, it depends on the very specific context in which that organization is operating. Thank you.
I will add, and I said things rather skeptically. Really, it has been male institutions which have accepted and advanced the equal opportunity legislation and equality for women, and even the vote for women if we go back a century, because all these institutions are male dominated. So this is not, what I said is not an accusation against men, but the initiative, in my view, comes mainly from women. It's women's organizations that have moved these things. And Simone de Beauvoir say, how do people deprived of liberty lift themselves out of this lack of liberty to acquire liberty? Well, this is women's situation. They have to be the main protagonists, I think, for equality for women. And we have, and there are men who are receptive to it and will respond well enough. But when I say, I do not think that most of the initiatives for women's advancement actually are coming from men and male-dominated organizations. But some men are receptive, and we need them to be receptive.
I actually agree with you, Professor Francis. You need to mobilize the men for them to be receptive. I have not yet met a male-dominated organization which then rises up and says, well, going to, to promote women's equality without some nod or push. But those who recognize that it's good for business, perhaps will start to initiate it themselves in the near future.
Mainly it's voluntary, and though it's really wonderful when it happens, the last time I looked, the number of businesses that have actually adopted these codes is not so great. It's compared with all the businesses that there are in the world. And I myself think that we should regard it as incumbent on businesses. They are required under international human rights law and often under national law. They are required to have equality for women and equal promotion for women and equal pay for women. It's their obligation. And one of the trends that I think is problematic is that has all become voluntary. It's corporations declare themselves ready to adopt these policies. Well, frankly, they're obliged to adopt these policies by international human rights law and international labor law.
I just wanted to say there are also men online now, and we'd be more than happy to hear from you. If you would like to comment on anything that's been said. I see a gentleman in front of me in a Star Wars background. Again, if anyone would we'd be happy to hear from the gentleman. So please feel free to comment on anything you'd like. Again, I just want to mention every other year we have a women's leadership international conference. And we always have a discussion who should come to the conference, whether it should be men or women. And once had a big discussion, let's say, with Maxine Fasberg, who was the head of Intel in Israel. And she said, I won't come to speak at the conference if you don't have men at the conference. I don't need to speak to the women who are already convinced. And we had a long conversation about that, and we did have men in the conference, not enough, but it's always an interesting issue because you go to the CSW in New York or you go to all these places, 99.9% are women. So the question is if we should also change our perspective of who we talk to and whether the convinced talk to the convinced or whether we try and, as women, open up and get more men into the conversation, into the.
They do have. Sorry, yeah. They have to agree to come. They have to agree to dedicate their time to it, and that's not always the case.
Yeah, but I think we also need to encourage a bit more.
Absolutely.
Okay. Honestly, a mind-blowing discussion, especially on the last topic. So now moving on, we see that there are still laws working differently for men and women. What is the most important challenge in women's empowerment in this regard, besides the context that is very sensitive issue as well?
I'm not quite sure I understand the question.
Yeah,
Could you
Maya, would
ask
you
the
like
person who
to?
asked it to clarify?
I see here, her name is Maya. Maya. Okay, here you
Yes.
are. Hi.
Hi, everyone. I'm glad to be here with you today. So I will try explain my question. So we still see that the laws, it doesn't matter actually, it's local laws or the conventions that are like makes our aim joint, but we see that the laws, especially local laws, are working differently for men and women. It's because of the I don't know, roots of the stereotypes or cultural things and so on and so on, but we see this. So what do you think, what is the most important challenge in this regard that we could aim to struggle for changing the attitude and changing, making law at the same way as for men and women? If I made it clear.
Go ahead.
Do you mean that there are different laws for men and women, or it's the same laws but affects men and women differently?
Exactly. Thank you.
Can you give an example?
Like for example, like land ownership, right? So we don't have any barriers regarding law. Like as men and women can be owners of the law, but we still know that only 1% of the women are landowners. So how can we change this?
Well,
and how can we work besides the stereotypes and besides the mental changes that we know will take 50 years? I mean, what kind of mechanism can be used?
There's been a lot of work done on this, and we have a report of the Working Group on Discrimination Against Women, particularly on both in the economic report that we did and the family report that we did, where firstly, a lot of property comes to people through the family. So family law has to be equal in the way women inherit and in the way within a marriage, women have access, have ownership and management rights over half of the property. Now then, it's not necessarily half of the property, it depends where the property comes from and so on, but certainly a female contribution, which may be that they do more of the caring, the unpaid caring and looking after the house, they should still, that should be counted into a partnership in a marriage so that they then have half of the property. And the same the other way around. If there is a man who's doing the caring work, and which happens these days, and the housework, and it's the woman who has the full-time income and is producing the property. Again, it has to be equal weight in the partnership has to be given to all the different functions of the partnership. So that's where one of the sources of property come from. Now, in traditionalist societies, and I shall leave this more to Christine because it's very much been very strong in Africa and in Asia, in traditionalist societies where women were not entitled to own land, this has been changing, at least at the legal level. And the question is how far it's been changing in the at the implementation level as regards women owning property. But so that's another aspect of it, that, you know, in traditional and customary systems, how far women are entitled to be owners of property. So I think that what you're saying, that what you have to change is the basis by which women have access to property, land, financial property, income, the whole range of economic property rights. I don't know if that helps to answer your question, Maya.
Yeah. Yes, indeed, that's very right. And in fact, I just want to give an example of Rwanda, where the parliament, which is 61% women legislators, ensured that 26% in the land reform agenda, 26% of the land is owned by women, especially female-headed, households, women on their own. And 54% is shared by the husband and wife, meaning that in that equation, women still ended up in a much better place. It takes real effort and real determination, but also it requires investment. And there are some organizations like the Women Lawyers Associations that we have found very powerful. In Uganda, where I come from, for example, I think there are participants here from Uganda. They will tell you about FIDA, this Women Lawyers Association. Before, when a woman lost her husband, property would be easily taken up by, the family of the husband. But now the men know this woman will take you to FIDA. And this FIDA has lawyers that are very, very strong. They go to media, they just pull all the strings to make sure that a woman does not suffer. So no man wants to go to FIDA. No one wants to be subjected to that scrutiny. But I also wanted to give another example on some laws or policies that have been put forward by governments, like women have to have at least 30% of public procurement. That is a policy that is respecting the quota system, that is giving 30% of public procurement to women-led businesses. However, many of the women don't know about it. Many of the businesses don't have the capacity to submit, viable, proposals or quotations. They don't have the systems that are required to meet the level of volumes of services or products required. So a lot of additional investment in such policies has to be made to facilitate the women, because remember, they have already been left behind in so many ways. So we need to find ways of ensuring that facilitation takes place. Thank you.
All right, one last question, and I see that there's a comment also from Isar. Thank you so much for your comments. Our only male participant for the day. If you all want to read it, it's in the chat box. And we have Omulara. Would you like to present the question? Because I see it's kind of long, telling a personal story. So if you want to share it, we have a couple of minutes before we wrap up. Omulara? Okay.
Maybe Yasar, you want Yasar to make his comment?
Omulara, yes, you're with us.
Yes, I'm with you. Thank you very much. It's been very enlightening. Thank you so much. I had a personal experience. I think that if I can be enlightened on maybe advice on what to do. I remember when I went to put in for my PhD in Nigeria. Here, I'm from Nigeria, and I went to approach my professor to supervise work, and where they were just pushing me up and down, and I didn't understand what happened. And later now I understand that it was actually skeptical about taking up a female student because of the past experience they've had. They said the female students are somehow lazy, and their pace can be so slow and all that. I didn't know that anyway, but I persisted that I wanted him to supervise me. Eventually, when of course, everything is history, I finished I knew later, and I said to myself that I'm going to prove to that man that a male student is not better than me, a female student. And All of it all, it was very, very happy. Now, later, I head the departments now, and I work with women, both men and women. I have men under me and women. I've seen that the history is repeating itself. You see women, you have to push and push and push them. Some agree to be pushed, they change. And some will not just agree to be pushed. What can I do? What can be done to encourage women? I want more women to come on, like my environment, I'm pushing them, go for your PhD, so I can, you can be more marketable and all that. But somehow, many of them don't just want to do anything. They get complaints, this and that, and that's one. But two, is the fact that in some part of my country, of course, women majorly, but some things are changing right now. But majorly, women don't have control over their reproductive lives. Like majorly in some remote areas, it's more common now that it is when the man is ready to have children, the woman must be ready. I know by the time childbearing comes in, women are limited. You can't combine education and childbearing. And so when the man says, I want to have a child now, even if in the middle of your education, you have to stop and do something about it. So I want to ask, is there anything that is being done to kind of give women control over their childbearing lives so that they can have, many of them have given birth and that has put a stop to anything they want to achieve in life. And they are just there.
Okay. Thank
And
you,
these are
Malora.
Thank you. Yeah.
Thank you. All right. So what can be done? Professor Radai. You're on mute.
Oh.
There's no question that contraception should be absolutely affordable and accessible for women. And there's no doubt that within the family, under the CEDAW Convention, women have the right to determine the number and the spacing of their children, and they should be exercising their right. And of course, where the family is a patriarchal family, this may be very difficult. And that's one of the things we have to change, that has to be changed. Women have to be equal within the family. And incidentally, in the Human Rights Council, there has been a big fight over this, because the Human Rights Council passed a resolution talking calling for protection of the family, and they refused to reiterate women's right to equality in the family, which has existed since the Universal Declaration of Human Rights in 1948. And this was all the experts joined me in saying to the council, you must, if you ever talk about protection of the family, no resolution should be passed on this without reasserting the right of women to equality within the family, women with men and girls with boys. So that's the first thing. The second thing is, as I said, the accessibility and affordability of contraception. And the third thing is the accessibility and the affordability of medical termination of pregnancy in cases in the first trimester and at the will of the woman, and after that for a very wide variety of reasons, health, social, economic reasons, carefully thought out. So that is the first thing. Women have to be able to control their reproductive lives. But secondly, when women do have children and they have pregnancies, for the most part, where it's a healthy pregnancy and a healthy child, then the state has to provide, in my opinion, this is not written in the CEDAW Convention, and we have to move forward to saying that the state should provide child care services so that women can work. It's not the way it used to be, where the family is an extended family and the grandmother can look after the grandfather can look after the children while the women go out to work. And in countries which once upon a time had highly subsidized childcare systems, many of them no longer have. I'm talking about the socialist countries, or the were communist countries, China and Russia, which had full childcare services and no longer have them. or Israel, which was a socialist country and had very cheap childcare services and no longer provides them. We have to go back to demanding that the state provides childcare services in the way that it provides primary education, required to provide primary education, required to provide basic health care. Well, I think that childcare and incidentally, other dependent care, older people, sick people, the state has to take on that function. It will not solve all the problems. I am not going to be unrealistic. It does not solve all the problems. And some compromises have to be made by parents, fathers and mothers as regards looking after their children and pursuing their economic and educational agendas.
Yes, I would say to Omolara, I would challenge you to find a way in your university to see that university provides childcare services for PhD students or other students so that they can, and also professors, so that they can have their children and work at the same time. I think that would be a good place to start, which could then influence other spheres. It's just a challenge for you.
And it is, I mean, employers have been doing it because they need female staff. Of employers who need female staff have been doing that. Corporations in the United States of America, particularly, which doesn't have good childcare subsidy at all, doesn't have any childcare subsidies. But I still think that I agree that the universities or the employers can do it. Incidentally, I mean, if you don't succeed in that, groups of parents can get together and form parents' cooperatives where they do help each other with childcare. So if you can't achieve the institutional change or the governmental change, then you have to look for community support. Don't give up. I think we both want to say to you, Omolara, do not give up.
And I like Ophelia's comment.
I'm not giving Thank you. I like the contributions and I accept the challenge. I'll do just what you have said. I'm
Thank you. And I like Ophelia's comment that, you know, at least in her life, she has had an understanding husband who would take care of the children while she's, you know, busy and in school. That has also been the story of my life, and maybe that's one of the reasons I am here. But they also need incentives for that. You know, be kind to your family, reward them with praises when they do a good job. Basically, you know, and brag about them with others that they are doing a good job, and they will help you.
Good one.
I think that's so true, Christine and Professor Adai, who spoke about education. I think we can do so much ourselves by teaching our boys how to respect women, how to partner. And I have 3 boys and a male dog. So the dog I haven't been successful with, but the boys are all wonderful husbands. And I think that's my contribution, more than being at the center, but I think that's my contribution to the world, at least to their wives, certainly. That they're good husbands and they're good partners and they all know how to cook and clean and they enjoy it. Not only do they know, they want to do it. I think that all of us
I can say the same. I can say the same, actually. 1 son and 2 daughters, but I can say the same.
So I think this is one thing we can contribute and we can do, and I think that will already change the world for the next generation. And I think certainly in Israel, I don't know if you feel this, Professor Adai, but I see the difference today when I go into a playground on Saturday and I see most of the people in the playground with the children are men, as opposed to in my lifetime, well, there was no man in the playground. I don't think my husband knew how to open the wagon there for the child. I don't think he ever opened it and ever took a child out. So I think things are changing. I think we can be optimistic, and I think today was an amazing learning experience for all of us, and we thank you so much, and we hope. I see some of our past participants in women's conference, Arisa, and I see other people with us that have been to Israel. And I think what we have to contribute at our center, and also with Christine, is that we're very open and honest. So maybe we look at our society a bit pessimistically many times, but I think we've come a long way. And we have a long way to go, but we have come a long way. And I think working together, and as I say, with our children and with the next generation, and we hope to see a difference. Again, politics is a big topic, you know. Many of us don't want to go into politics, and many of the good people say, no, that's not for me, dirty politics. So we have to train ourselves as well to go in there and to give the fight, and that we can do it just as well. And I do see some politicians here with us today, and I congratulate them. Arisa and other friends, hi. And so I think you're great, and it's, you know, we talk, so that's a bit easier, training and, you know, talking, but doing is really tough. So I congratulate Frances, who has done so much through the Women's Network and all the different things she's done in her career, amazing career, and to Christine, who's been all over the world and a champion for women's empowerment. But I think, you know, because I see quite a few pessimistic reactions here in the chat, but I think we can do it. We can make change, and again, it'll take 200 years, wow, that's a bit much, but...
That was not my assessment. That was the World Economic Forum. I'm quoting it. No, I want to say there were wonderful questions here. If those are representative of the women here and now, we can make the change a lot faster than 200 years, because they were really very good questions.
And our gentleman also had a great comment, and we hope you stay.
Can we hear his comment?
Would you like to speak a few words? Do us a favor, please, sir. Yes, sir. Would you like to? Can we ask you to speak?
Or you read out his comment, maybe.
I will read out his comment. So the comment was, in order for the world to achieve sustainable peace, tranquility, and happiness, in order to understand and correctly solve the problems we experience in the 21st century world, we need a woman's mind, a woman's logic and understanding and leadership. Thank you again and again for this program that confirms it. So it confirms
lovely.
it. So, yeah.
Beautiful.
That was a lovely note to end on, was it not?
Yeah, completely.
Thank you, sir, and thank you, everyone. There was, I think, was a great session. It's on Facebook Live. You can watch yourselves. You can hear it again if you didn't get something. If you want to send the link to someone, please do. And we hope to see you again soon. Thank you so much, Professor Adai, Christine. Thank you.
Thank you. Lovely meeting you. Lovely meeting you, Christine, too, and lovely to see you.
And thank you all for being on today. Thank you very much.
Lovely meeting you, Professor Francis. I hope we can keep in touch.
Yes, we come to Israel next year.